You want to go in a market where you don't have competition. So if you think about Revolut against Monzo, right, like the markets we grew the fastest wasn't the UK. It was Ireland, it was Romania, Poland. We went in a lot of markets where we just didn't have competition, which allowed us to raise more money, build better products, hire more people. There's always like a way you can see the market or you can segment the market where you basically can build a product where essentially you don't have much competition, where your product is 10x better than the status quo. And I think, the best founders, they find these markets, they find these unique insights.
Ready to go? Val, this is such a joy to do. I've wanted to make this one happen for a while, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Harry.
Not at all, but I want to start, growth is a weird world, so to speak. How did you first make your way into the world of growth?
It's actually quite random. So I studied in software engineering when I was a kid, selling websites, and it's quite a lot of effort to build for clients, these websites, especially back in the days, that was 2004. And so a friend of mine basically started, building his own websites and then essentially made a lot of money. So I was quite curious and interested what he does differently. And he taught me basically the early signs of search engine optimizations. And so then over the years, I basically learned more and more about marketing, which essentially moved me in this growth role.
What was the first growth role you had?
I mean, there wasn't really growth back then. I was a software engineer at MindMeister. There wasn't really anyone in the company that knew marketing or SEO. And so essentially, basically one of my projects was how can you share mind maps on external websites and essentially generate traffic. I mean, we quite a few million people, and I guess that was the first time I really got exposure to growth.
You were then head of growth at Revolut, scaling from 0 to 10 million in customers. What were the biggest lessons from that journey? That's quite an incredible experience to have.
I think what I really learned at Revolut was that it's a lot better to do one thing, but do it really well, than doing 10 or 100 things at the same time.
What one thing do you think you did at Revolut really well?
So for example, 90% of the customers, B2C customers that Revolut ever acquired came through referrals.
How do you do a referral loop that's so effective?
Couple of optimizations. Essentially, we thought about okay, let's say I'm here at the podcast, right? And I want to, I love Revolut. It helps me, when I travel, I don't have to overspend. And so I'm basically telling you about the product, right? What you want to achieve is that while we're talking here, you can actually sign up and make your first payment. For example, I don't know, order something on Deliveroo. And so we optimized the product to basically make sure that enough people can go through that whole journey in less than 5 minutes. And so essentially, because it's so easy, so quick, we had so many people that just went to their friends, to the family, strangers on the street, to just basically get people into Revolut.
Do you think people do referral platforms or programs well today? We see so many. Invite a friend and get £20. Do people do it well?
I don't think so. So the interesting thing about referrals is that there isn't really a lot of information on the internet about how it really works. And so it took me about 9 months to figure out, how to actually make it work, right? So the common knowledge is okay, one person needs to invite more than one person, right? And that gives you an exponential growth. So the problem is it really depends on how fast that invite happens. So for example, if on average I bring 3 people in, but it takes 3 years, it's really slow, the growth. The growth of the company. On the other hand, if you, let's say, get 3 people in every 3 minutes, you grow a lot faster, right? So one thing we done at Revolut was essentially engineer how fast or how short it takes for new people to invite their peers and their friends, which actually worked really well to a point where we had to cap how many people actually sign up.
How did you minimize that time from successful onboard to referring a friend? Because you don't want to shove it in someone's face straight away of hey, Val, you've just signed up, now refer friends. How did you minimize that time window?
I think, first thing was the onboarding, right? And during onboarding, in the early days, we had maybe an activation rate of, so basically new users that actually make a payment, it was maybe 30, 35%. When I left, it was around 90%. So like 9 out of 10 people actually made a payment.
What was the reason that they weren't, and what did you change?
Essentially, I didn't really know how to figure it out. So what I did was I sent an email to 4,000 people and was like, hey, why did you stop using Revolut, right? And the interesting thing that came back was that the majority of people didn't stop using Revolut. They just didn't have a use case for it yet. Because back in the days, it was known as a travel card. Yeah. And so what we realized is like people don't see Revolut as an everyday banking card. So we started changing the way we market the product, position it in the market, but also making sure that there's no technical issues. Like, for example, people try to verify their identity at night, and then you use a flash, and so suddenly the software can't detect your identity card. Or, I don't know, in Italy, we had a weird problem. People don't have MasterCards or Visa, so they can't do actually online payments, which we use traditionally to top up your account. But then also, like, Italy is a bit backwards in terms of their banking system. So you couldn't make international bank transfers from your bank account. So we had to figure out basically how we get users to actually get money onto their account.
Did you have lessons in terms of what referral kind of rewards were attractive to people? Like, does the size of the money matter if it's £10 or £50? Is a voucher better than cash? Were there any lessons on what is attractive?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the more money you pay, the more attractive it gets.
And you really see that clearly?
Yeah, you can see that. The problem is, like, you don't want to have a CPA of, 200, right? So I think back in the days, we had a CPA of around £9, which was like, compared to banks that had like 250, it was quite low.
It's pretty good. And then if you have a 30% at that time person who sends their first payment, then it's actually like a £27 CPA, no? If you think about it. If 1 in 3 actually converts to like a converted customer in that respect, it's like a 27.
Well, so in the early days, we didn't offer any money. So in the early days, basically we just gave away a free Revolut card. So it was basically like, we were always quite cash stripped at Revolut, right? I mean, basically in banking, you need to have a lot of cash actually on payment accounts.
Yeah.
To make sure, like, let's say if customers go into negative, that somebody can cover it, or if there's fraud happening. So like a lot of the fundraising went directly back into product engineering, but also like in payment platforms. So like we always had very aggressive acquisition targets, but we never had really money to spend on things. So we had to become creative on like, how can we still give value to people, but still hit our targets?
You mentioned there the 30% going to 90%.
Yeah.
And that being like, because people thought it was travel cards. Oh, I don't know if I have a use case for it. Maybe I will do in time. How did you change that, but not lose the original customers who like the travel cards?
The interesting thing about Revolut is why it was created in the first place. Nick was a trader, right? Like trading millions or hundreds of millions of currencies. So it's basically like, I don't know, I need to sell $100 million into euros, right? And he would trade it for free against other big banks. And when he went to Vegas and took some money to play poker, they took away around 10 to 15% because of the currency exchange. And because he was like, look, I mean, I trade hundreds of millions of dollars without paying any fees. He was like, hey, maybe there's an opportunity, right? So he was a bit pissed about that banks basically ripped him off and then started Revolut. And I think, like this was kind of like for us, it was kind of like the engine that drove the company so fast, because we were always based on a multi-currency product, which allowed us to add cryptocurrencies, commodities, but also like create new innovative products. Like, for example, you're spending in pounds, but saving in euros.
Did the new products make your life easier with growth or harder? Because you suddenly have more to sell, different messaging. How did it change your role?
I think a lot easier, to be fair. I think it's actually the biggest mistake that founders do, that they over-optimize their product. It sounds quite counterintuitive, right? But it's a bit like if, let's say, you're Apple. There's only so much revenue you can make with an iPhone, because not everybody wants or needs an iPhone. But so now, like, if you have a second product, let's say AirPods, you can sell to one client not just $1,000 phone, you can also sell $200 earphones, right? And then if they also need a laptop, you can sell it for another 2,000. And I think, like Revolut was built in a similar way. We basically used FreeFX as an acquisition driver. I mean, the value proposition of the product was so strong that like we didn't really have to pay a lot to get people into our product. Essentially, what we needed to do is just accelerate already dynamics that are happening. For example, that friends tell their friends, or making sure that people don't, get somewhere stuck through the software, right? And then basically what we did was like a lot of cross-selling. So essentially, okay, you're already in, you use the product. Okay, now you want to buy cryptos. Cool, 3% margin. You want to buy stocks. You have a spread there. You need business banking at some point. You make some money there. So that was always like the secret sauce, which I think, like for a long time, competitors couldn't really figure out. I think TransferWise couldn't really figure out, like, how can we give it away for free and still make more money than them?
Do you think founders wait too long to release a second product?
Yeah. I mean, Revolut, if you think about it, like Nick and Vlad, they launched 2015, June. And then we launched a premium product, basically the paid subscription, like a year and a half from there, which basically went through the roof.
Was that immediately successful?
Yeah, it was instant success.
Why do you think that was?
I think people wanted a bank card that actually looked like an iPhone. I think bank cards back in the days, they looked quite cheap.
Yeah.
And, Revolut made them sexy. So people were actually proud to show off their bank card. I guess it was like a ego thing, right? If you go to a bar or restaurant and you pay with the card and then people are like, hey, what's this card? How did you get it? It makes you feel good.
Yeah, for sure. The metal card. Everyone loves a metal card.
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing, honestly. We didn't expect how much demand was there for that card.
For the metal card?
Yeah, we had like 10,000 cards pre-ordered. I was literally sold out after an hour. And then basically we had like, I think 4 months of like waiting line where basically every day more people ordered than we could manufacture. It was like, I guess that went really well, but I guess we could have done even more.
What growth experiments didn't work?
I think we tried a lot, right? Some experiments are hard to measure. For example, we went to all the big tech companies like Google, Uber, in our lunch break to hand out cards in their cafeteria. And obviously it's hard to measure like, okay, what's really the long-term impact, right? So I think it was just like we tried a lot of things. And once we saw something works, we just doubled down and just did it until you couldn't do it anymore. So let's say we saw, okay, YouTube influencers work really well. We saw a spike in one country. Okay, let's just get every YouTube influencer on the market. And then after a month, there weren't any left, and you basically find the next thing.
What are some lessons on how to make YouTube influencers successful? Everyone kind of has this idea, well, I'm going to do the influencer strategy. I don't think many people know how. And I think they just have an idea that I'm just going to pay them a wedge of cash. Others have the affiliate code. Any lessons from that?
I think growth is actually quite simple. It doesn't really matter which channel you're using, but it's always basic math. I mean, let's say an influencer. You look at like, okay, on average, how many views will they generate per video? So you can expect roughly like how many people will see it. Then how many people do you think will click through from the video to actually your website or app store? I would, you can take conservative market estimates, like 5% or something. And then essentially how many people actually convert from, checking out your website to actually becoming a user. And after that, it's basically like you have your typical rates, like what's your subscription rate? And so you can calculate roughly like, okay, if I pay that person, like if I want to achieve a CPA of, let's say, $10, like what's the maximum I can offer the influencer to do this? I mean, that's basically the starting point. And then essentially what you do is you test 3-4 in different niches and see basically what works.
Is it quite difficult when you don't know your LTV, your lifetime value?
Well, nobody really knows it. Because
this is
how
the
do
challenge,
you know?
and so you don't know the ultimate value of a customer, and so it's like, God, your CPA could be one thing, but actually, if they don't stick around for very long and they churn after a year, You don't have nearly that CAC elasticity that you would do if they stayed for 7 years.
I think in initially it's about getting data, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, like let's say in the first year, you have no clue like how long people stay in 5 years, right? Because so I think what you can see is like you can look at cohorts, so month by month cohorts, and you can look at the drop off of these cohorts. So let's say people that sign up in January versus people that sign up in February. How many people come back a month after? So you can compare it. Do you improve things? Do you make things worse? That's A. And then B is basically, do they ever flatten? You know, because ideally, for example, Revolut in the early days, you could see, okay, maybe 35% of the people made the first payment in the first month. But then basically it flattened, right? And then I think it settled around 20%. And so after 3-4 months, it just didn't drop below 20%. So it always stayed there. And then essentially when we started to optimize the product, you actually saw more like a smiley curve. So it actually increased and got high again. So cohorts that used to be at 20 suddenly were at 30.
What were the core drivers of that?
I think we probably had a more broader product portfolio. I think equally we focused more on everyday banking. So we built a product that was more useful for everyday banking, right? Standing orders, direct debits, budgeting, savings accounts, which essentially, I guess, then the combination of all of them gave people more reasons to stay and use it rather than the NatWest or Barclays card.
I wanted to start on, people love to throw around PLG. It's like, it's been the kind of hot word in our industry for years now. But you said to me before, there's traditional marketing methods that are outdated. And you were brilliant in, when we chatted, like just dropping these one-liners that I was like, great, thanks for expanding. Why are traditional marketing methods outdated?
I think it's just like, the market is so saturated, oversaturated, that it's just, basically traditional marketing means like it's not scalable, right? Like essentially it only scales with human output. So essentially, if I want to have twice as many people coming to my website, I need to hire twice as many people, which becomes, as the company grows, it becomes more and more expensive. And then typically teams would get less efficient, so I need even more people. I think, if you look at growth, which is essentially, you build software that does marketing for you, it basically scales exponentially. So I need less and less people in the future to get bigger and bigger results.
Build software that does marketing for you is an interesting way of describing it. Referrals is one. What are other innovative, cool methods that you think people should look at instead?
For acquisition?
Yeah.
You can do a paid marketing loop. So essentially, I think Uber did it quite well, where they offered money, or actually like PayPal in the early days. You offer someone money to sign up, and essentially, like as long as they bring in more money, like the whole loop is working. We have content acquisition. So, for example, YouTube is a great example, right? Like somebody signs up to YouTube, uploads a video, and then other people are gonna watch it. They share it. I don't know, on other platforms or.
Did you find paid marketing at Revolut effective?
We didn't use it.
We didn't use it?
No.
Wow. Why?
It's just, you don't build anything sustainable. If you turn off the money tomorrow, it's just gone.
Huh. Okay.
You want to invest in something. For example, if you build search, right? Let's say Canva, for example.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get rid of Canva, right? Even if they don't spend anything anymore, even if they don't improve anything anymore. Because like for nearly everything, you're going to search around marketing, graphic design, I don't know, PowerPoint presentations, like Canva is the number one spot. So I think Canva nowadays is much larger in terms of volume generated to the website than Adobe. So it's really hard to, disrupt them.
It's the most brilliant SEO play.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And I think it's similar in other firms where, I don't know, let's say WhatsApp or Revolut in a way, because Revolut is very incentivizing for others to join, because, at some point it becomes, you're basically uncool if you don't have Revolut. You get the group pressure to get Revolut. So let's say you go to, I don't know, you play paddle one pace for the whole group. If one person doesn't have Revolut, everybody else will push him to get Revolut because it's more convenient to get paid.
Any lessons on content marketing as a customer acquisition channel?
I think there's two ways to make it work. Either you have user-generated content, when, let's say, Pinterest, YouTube, you can basically then create content or topic clusters where you basically create hierarchy of like how you create dynamic landing pages. So essentially software creates landing pages that match the keywords that people are searching for. So that's like if you have a lot of user-generated content. I think often nowadays, if you look, for example, at Canva, what they've done is they created content. So you basically have crazy big in-house teams that generate content for you so that you can create these topic clusters, which I think is actually one of the most exciting things that I've learned in the last 2 years, because I've never seen that before, or probably haven't understood it before.
In terms of the topic clusters created by internal teams?
Yeah.
Is there anything that startup founders can learn from that?
I think in the early days, right, people built a two-sided marketplace where essentially you had to control or grow both supply and demand. I think what a lot of companies nowadays do, they control both supply and demand.
Yeah.
So essentially it's a lot easier because you can just, rather than having to convince people, to basically use your software and be super engaged, you can just pay someone for it. They can generate content for you. And as you build more content, you generate more traffic, which then generates you more revenue. So I think ultimately, I think what's nowadays happening is that because people understand kind of like the tactics to grow their channels, whether it's just SEO, referrals, paid, they execute a lot faster. And you basically usually bring things first in-house because you have more control. And then as you grow, you maybe shifted more towards user-generated. So basically, you cut your cost.
When you look across the channels, most founders I speak to have one that really works. They're like, it's great, we've got that, it's working, but we need to diversify and we need to make sure that we're not too concentrated. Do you agree that you need to diversify early, or when you have one working, do you say just double the fuck down? It's hard enough to get one working.
I would double down on the first one.
And just continue?
I mean, I would still do some other channels, but it depends. It depends on the size of the company, right? I think a pretty big mistake is to go too early in too many channels, because in the end of the day, you rely quite heavily on data to understand what works, what doesn't work, and you really need to understand it, right? Because otherwise you can't replicate it. And the problem is the more channels you have, the harder it is to measure directly the impact of a specific channel, because there's obviously a lot of noise coming in. Yeah. And then essentially because you have more noise, your decisions gets worse, and which makes it then a lot harder and slower to actually, really nail one channel, for example, to generate 1 million new users a month.
I totally get you. You said there about kind of the importance of getting that early data. I'm always struck on the timing of hiring a growth head, a growth person. In terms of that timing, before we get to the person, I've had people on the show say before, you need a head of growth to get the data in. And then I've had people say, that's ridiculous. You hire a head of growth post product market fit when you have something to scale. Which side of the table do you sit on, and why?
I think a head of growth makes sense once you demonstrate product market fit.
Do they not help you get the data to get to product market fit?
I think it's really hard because once there's a head of growth, you expect it to grow. And that basically means you need to show month-on-month growth. The problem is if your company didn't have, there's obviously a lot of tactics, right? It's one other big lesson I learned is even if you don't have product market fit, you can sell a business for 400 million. Because if you're just good enough to generate constantly more traffic, and it's cheaper to generate or buy traffic than the money you're making, the business is still growing. It's probably not the best business because you're losing the customers in 6 or 9 months again, but it's still working, right? So if you just sell early enough, everybody or nearly everyone is happy. I think, the difference is if you look at really companies that really nailed product market fit, whether it's OpenAI with ChatGPT, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, they had very early proper product market fit. And my assumption is that similar to the story about Nick is that the best founders, they have a very unique view on the market. They have very unique insights. They know something that just other people haven't seen yet or known yet. For example, Nick's case is basically that there's no fee on FX, which is basically what you needed to understand, okay, people travel all the time, people send money all the time, right? So why does everybody pay 7, 8, 9% on this? And I think it's similar if you look at probably Apple, that had unique insights around like electronics and like how people use these computers. I think, Kittl, for example, the founder, like one of the founders was a graphic designer selling his typefaces. And essentially what they realized is like people didn't want the typefaces, people wanted the assets that they used to market the typefaces. But then the softwares that were on the market, like they were either too complicated for the audience or they couldn't do it.
So if we agree then that it should be post-product market fit because you expect it to grow when you have it, what's the right profile then? Like you're an advisor advising me, a founder, an early stage founder who's just got kind of early signs of product market fit. Should I go for a super young person who hasn't been a head of growth before and scale them into that role? Should I go for a head of growth? Like what should that profile be?
I personally always believe it's better like to have someone that grows with the company, they're rough diamonds, but they're ambitious, they're hardworking, they want to prove themselves. To be honest, there's not many growth people that want to do it again. I think it's just like...
Why is that? Just because it's too hard?
I think it's just super stressful. I mean, it's basically like...
What's the most stressful thing about being a head of growth?
You need to hit every week metrics. I mean, it's quite like black and white, right? Either the company is growing or it's not. It doesn't really matter why it's not growing, but it needs to grow.
When we chatted, you said that most companies kind of fail at hiring. I did want to touch on this because this is like a universal process that every founder has to go through. Why do you think most founders or companies fail at hiring?
Probably two things. Like A, you don't test people for enough. So, you maybe have a conversation. You don't dig deep into, like, let's say they talk about a certain project or, some past incident, but you don't ask follow-up questions really to understand context, right? Like, did they contribute towards it or did they lead it? Like, can they explain in detail what was the problem or not? So I think, the best founders, they really dig deep in understanding, like, okay, what really happened? Do I believe that person actually made that impact? Do they understand enough to make that impact? And then the second thing, which is essentially, if you look at sports, for example, Michael Jordan, Cristiano Ronaldo, Kobe Bryant, you don't have to motivate these people. It doesn't matter what they will do. They will always be the best. It's just their attitude. It's the mindset, right? And I think, you want to see the same thing in the people you hire. You want people that are hungry, people that are passionate.
What do you think Revolut did well when it came to hiring?
I think that was the main thing. I mean, I think we mentioned before, like Alan or Chad, I think myself. I think Nick basically looked for very young people, very driven people, and very smart people. That was basically the main requirements, right? The thinking was kind of like, we can teach people skills. We can't teach them the right behaviors or attitudes or mindset. So either you want it or you don't.
What were the biggest mistakes you think that you made in the hiring?
Probably just not assuming too much. Like basically, it sounds a bit harsh, but like, for example, not checking whether people want to work hard, right? Like just, you talk about it, but not directly asking like, hey, do you work weekends? Do you work evenings? And so, I think, like people try to be too nice or maybe politically
For those
correct.
that don't want to, do you think they admit it?
I think so. I think if you present it in a way like, look, this is the culture of the company, right? So we're looking for these people. I think it also gives the other person an opportunity to see whether it's the right thing for them.
Yeah.
Right? It's a bit like dating, right? Like if I don't know, some people, me at that point, I wanted to prove myself. For me, it was like, hey, I want to learn. I want to join a small company. It should become the next, Facebook. I just wanted to see what's different. And so for me, it was like, hey, yeah, I want to work weekends. I want to work long evenings. I really want to learn. Right?
Did you find the majority of people said, yes, I do want to work weekends and evenings?
In interviews?
Yeah.
No. But we probably didn't hire them.
Do you think it's a game of just meeting as many people as possible?
Part of it.
How do you do sourcing?
It's a bit like a funnel. Like, you know, you probably have a gut feeling of what you're looking for, right? Like maybe a benchmark of companies you find really attractive. So let's say, I don't know, operations, right? Okay, Uber has really excellent operations. So you would try to find people, okay, maybe people that work 2 years, 1 year at Uber, right? People that maybe want to do the next step. You can target these people on LinkedIn, and then essentially it's just, you basically message everyone that basically fits that criteria.
You didn't use recruiters?
No, we used tech. We used recruiters to schedule call, close contracts.
Yeah.
But like sourcing, screen calls, CV screening, it was usually done by hiring managers.
Anything on CVs that you'd be like, look for or be wary of?
If people don't use metrics, so if you can't clearly see what the impact of someone was, if people use vanity metrics, for example, a marketing manager or head of marketing that basically says, I managed 30 million budget. It's like, okay, maybe you generated $1 revenue, maybe 100 million. I mean, how does it matter?
It's like managers who brag about how much money they manage.
Yeah, or like somebody like, hey, I had a team of 20 people. And so, I mean, what does it mean, you know? For us, it was trying to, like, looking for red flags or looking for the attributes we're looking for. I think, like, seeing that somebody goes to the right unis, or essentially, I guess to reframe it, we wanted to see that people learn very fast and learn faster than the average person. So, you know, for example, I went to uni, but I dropped out. But like, I still was kind of like, you know, progressing very quickly in my career.
Again, I'm really using this for myself.
Yeah.
Like, what are the signs that someone is learning quickly, especially when you have a preference for young people where there's just less data points?
You can use benchmarks. So for example, unis, top unis. If you go to LSE, Stanford, Harvard, you're pre-vetted.
Yeah.
So you're quite smart. You're probably quite ambitious. So if you did the uni like in minimum term, plus, I don't know, worked at a tier 1 company, you probably fit the bill. So that's one way to attract these people. Second thing is, let's say if you're looking for someone more senior, like a product director, if you get promoted in 2-3 years to product director, you probably there's something different about you, right? Because other people, when somebody works as a product manager for, let's say, 10 years, you ask yourself, okay, why are they not a director, right? Why are they not leading a team? So we use these proxies to basically guess whether, you know, it's the right fit or not. Also, like, for example, typically in growth, we didn't look for people that studied marketing.
What did you look for?
Computer science.
Did you do take-home tasks in the interview process? What are some lessons on that? Because that's an interesting element.
You want to make them as hard as possible and as close to reality as possible.
Are they on your company? So they're on Revolut?
Yeah, so what we typically did was we took a past problem that was really hard to solve. We basically messed up the data a bit. So essentially that A, we couldn't use it, but B, also that our clients didn't have our data. And then essentially you would try to see how they solve it. So for example, at Revolut, like if you wanted to become a product manager or operations person, you had to analyze, I think, 1 million data sets and figure out like what's the problem in onboarding. It took us 3 months to solve the problem. So it was a good test to see.
And so you give it to them and you give them the hardest possible. I doubt any of them solve it, correct?
Not completely. I mean, that's not the point.
What are we looking for from it?
You want to look for the people who have a structured approach at solving problems. So essentially, realistically speaking, just from analyzing some data, you will never know for sure whether it's the right or wrong path, right? But you want someone that is very structured, like thinks about like, okay, what could be the root cause? How can I get insights about that? And ultimately, like, you want someone that has an approach on how to solve and identify a problem. And because then you can replicate it, right? Like, it doesn't matter which problem I give you, you can basically use the same approach to solve the problem again. If someone maybe just solved it in the past, but has no clue about, you know, how to do it again, it's a bit useless. In our environment, let's say.
How quickly do you know if you've made a good hire or a bad hire?
I think you have a gut feeling pretty quickly Probably a few days. Majority of people after a week, you're basically like, okay, that's not going to work.
Do you get rid in the first 2 weeks then?
I usually try to make it work for like 3-4 weeks, but if I can't make it work after 4 weeks, yes.
What were the signs that it wasn't working?
I guess it's because either people didn't clearly listen or pay attention. So they didn't fully understand what you expect of them when you give them feedback, for example, or give them a task. And then ultimately, as a result, they didn't really progress quickly or learn quickly. So, you know, if you would see like, okay, maybe the person is not perfect right now, but he's picking up pace really quickly. So in like 2 months, he will be there. I think you're fine because it will take you longer to hire a replacement.
Yeah.
But if you feel like, you know, you give him a lot of feedback and it's just not getting better, you're basically like, okay, I mean, it's not going to get better than in 2 months or 3 months, right? So that's kind of like what I'm looking for.
Do you think you had a good culture at Revolut?
It depends how you define a good culture. I think what a lot of people forget is that Revolut is like that company that's at the 0.01%. You know, it's like a SpaceX, a Facebook, a Meta. I think all these companies are very similar.
What do you mean by that?
Even if you look at like something like sports, right? Like the top clubs like Real Madrid or, I don't know, Bayern Munich or, I don't know, Manchester City, they just expect more of you. It's a more cut-through environment. Like either you perform or you're out. Because, you know, there's a reason why they are like the elite clubs. I think it's similar in startups, right? Like if you like Facebook in the early days, Apple, Microsoft, you have to win, you know. It's the mentality of the founder. You want to be the fastest growing company. You want to be the dominant force in your market. So if people, you know, don't fit that environment, if they can't contribute, it's not that people are like necessarily bad or that in general they wouldn't be successful somewhere else. It just means in that environment, they're not a good fit.
What are your biggest lessons on how to train people effectively? It's hard to do well.
It sounds very counterintuitive, but essentially spending more time with them. So I have like Oleg, he's a good friend nowadays. He was the lead product designer at my team at Revolut. Very creative designer, very unstructured, unfocused. And so Revolut expected you like every week you need to show progress, right? So every week we have a design sync with Nick. And you just had to show like, hey, we're making progress, right? Like that's basically what you work on the whole week. And Oleg basically like he spent so much time just optimizing one screen, right? So basically we had 20, 30 variations of one screen, but we didn't have like a user journey. So when we had the review, essentially there wasn't much progress to be seen, right? We didn't really understand how the solution would solve the problem of the customer. And it took him like, I mean, the second week happened, right? Same problem. And I was like, okay, this is not going to work. You know, if you know, I need new user flows in like maximum 2-3 weeks, because otherwise like engineering doesn't have anything to do.
Dude, I've got 40 of the same screen now.
Yeah. So basically what I was like, okay, I mean, ultimately I have a choice, right? I can try to do it on my own, or I can, you know, but it's probably putting more load on me. It's not a sustainable solution. Or I need to try to make it work with him, right? And so basically what we did was like I had 4 catch-ups a day. So he had to give me an update every 2 hours, and he got tasks on what he needs to change in the next 2 hours. After 3 weeks, it was just, I don't know, somehow he figured it out, and he knew kind of like what you expect of him, which then essentially we could also just have once a week, a catch-up about, what's going on in product design.
How important do you think it is to have the reviews? You said there about design reviews, but in growth, maybe in particular, how do you think about growth reviews, syncing as a team on progress? How often? What should be involved?
I think in the end, like, I think it's you need a feedback cycle, right? You need to kind of see like, okay, I try A, is it good, is it bad? What's good, what's bad? What could I improve? I think the more frequent you have these things, the better, because essentially you learn faster. I mean, it's kind of like, imagine like every time you get feedback is a cycle. Every time you complete a cycle, you learn. So the more cycles you have, the faster you learn. And so often what managers do is basically a performance review every 3 months, right? It's not okay. Like basically that means like it's very slow that you develop, because if you do something wrong, if you don't think the right way, you know, if you focus on the wrong things, like you get feedback after 3 months. So I think probably doing it daily is too extreme, but like I think once a week was kind of like what we found optimal, to move really fast, but equally like have
For the
time
whole
to really
team?
work. Yeah, so we had like in every function, we had once a week an update. And so for example,
Is Nick there in everyone?
not in everyone, but like Nick, for example, had 70, 80 one-on-ones a week. So basically like every product team sync, Nick was in it. Every design team sync, Nick was in it.
Did that make it better or worse?
I think it's the reason why there's so many talented people coming out of Revolut.
Why? Because they
They
benefited
all
from his
worked
wisdom.
with Nick, you know, quite intensely. I mean, it kind of like it's his way of thinking, right? Then, I mean, it's basically like if it's kind of like imagine you're spending every week with Elon Musk, half an hour, right? And every week you get feedback from Elon Musk about, you know, what you could do better, right? How he thinks, how he sees things, you know, what you didn't consider, what you could do better, you know. Like obviously, you know, you're going to learn a lot from that.
Does he lead through fear?
He read a book called Principles, which he really likes,
I
apparently.
know he said it on the show. Except
Yeah.
he goes, I got PDF quicker than book.
Yeah, it was more direct, I guess.
I thought it was such a Nick thing there, like PDF better than book.
That's
Thanks,
true.
Nick.
Yeah, I think, I mean, look, he believes, I mean, he comes from a scientific background, so he ultimately believes in truth. And one thing that Ridalio says in the book is that, you know, truth sometimes hurts. But if you find an environment that's more scientific and ultimately truth-seeking, it gives more an environment where you basically thrive, right, and really get results. And so I think what Nick created was ultimately like an environment where truth matters. So I could go always to Nick and basically say, look, that's wrong. Here's the data that proves you wrong, right? And he would always listen and consider it. And if he agrees with it, or if I give him new data, he would change his mind. So I think, so ultimately, yes, there's probably some element of fear. Maybe not directly from him, but maybe that you put on yourself because you might feel, okay, you're not good enough, or other people are smarter than you, or, you know, you're not prepared enough. I guess ultimately people don't want to be wrong. So there was always this element of like, okay, maybe I didn't think about something. Maybe, you know, I forgot something. Maybe I'm missing something, right? Which keeps people a bit on their toes. But equally, I think it also helped, or is the main reason why Revolut built such an amazing company, right? Built such an amazing product. Because it didn't really matter, like, you know, whose ideas it is. You know, it ultimately mattered, like, what's the best we can do.
What breaks with scale that fast? When you're scaling that fast, where it's like, you know, metal cards are going out faster than you can make them, literally. What breaks in a company?
Everything. Everything. You kind of had to rebuild everything in-house every few months. Like, I mean, for example, I went there when we were like 80 people. I left when it was 2,500. That's 2.5 years. Like, my team went from 2 people to over 150 in like 9 months. Like, everything breaks, you know, like the way you communicate doesn't work anymore. The way you, I mean, I don't know, like we had, for example, we couldn't upgrade to a bigger database anymore, right? Like basically Google didn't have bigger databases. So we had to split the databases and sync them somehow. Yeah, I think it's just like, I can't remember, like, was it 700-800 million transactions that we processed in one single month at the end before I left? And we're just growing every month with hundreds of millions of new transactions. You know, it was just mad. When we did referrals, for example, when we launched it, we went from 15,000 new users a day. And we only launched it in one market.
15,000 new users a day.
Yeah. But when we launched it, we went in one market, Romania, from 2,000. And after 3 days, we won 64,000.
In Romania?
Just in Romania. We just launched in one market because we didn't want to break the whole system. We then had to turn it off because we grew too fast and suddenly
that was just with referrals?
Yeah. And so basically what happened was like suddenly KYC times, right? Went from 3 minutes or a minute, right? To suddenly like 2 weeks. Customer support waiting lines went from, 10 minutes to 4 weeks. So I think that was, that's what was the challenging part, right? That it's just not one system that you have to scale up. You have to scale up every system internally in the company with rapid pace.
Was how you grow different in different countries? Compare Germany, France, Spain to Romania?
Not really. I think nowadays it's probably you need to attract new markets. So probably, they started doing more TV advertising, these sort of things. So you also, attract people in their 50s, 60s, 70s and so on.
There was always a big thing. I remember Tom at Monzo being on the show and he was like, the big thing that everyone said was, but you'll never be able to be the primary bank account. And that was always the thing. Like, oh, Revolut or Monzo, it's great, but like it'll never be the primary bank account. When and how do you feel you cracked that?
I mean, I use it as my main bank account.
Totally.
So already for like 7-8 years.
Did that impact your product marketing?
That I used it myself?
No, that you wanted to be the primary.
I think that was the interesting thing. Like we never thought about it that way, right? I think from the early days, it was always like, we don't want to build a bank. So, I mean, we even had on our website, right, better than a bank account, and bank was crossed out. Like, I think it was always like the clear message, like, look, banks are broken, banks rip you off. We don't want to be a bank. We want to rebuild and build something better than before. And I think for a long time, we really wanted to distance ourselves from the entire banking system, right? We didn't want to rip off our customers the same way. We want to build better services, faster services, new innovative products. And I think it helped us to basically build something that the competition like Monzo and 26 never done.
We've mentioned data so many times, so final topic before we go quick fire. But you said before that there's conventional wisdom around data strategy. What is the conventional wisdom and how do you think about it?
I think typically companies use event-driven data infrastructure, mixed panel, amplitude. Didn't really change for like probably 15, 20 years, which usually creates most of the issues in a company. I actually think that if you look at Uber, Airbnb, Meta, they don't use events, or at least not in the early days. We didn't use events at Revolut. I think the problem is often that engineering doesn't really have access to data or doesn't use data much. So they may be a bit scared of the topic. Then traditionally, data people weren't very technical. It was usually companies that had a data team had data analysts, not data scientists or the data engineering. And then essentially like product managers or business people wanted certain insights. So people went to Mixpanel, went to Amplitude because it was easy, right? Just one line of code. I think then over the years what people or some companies realized is that actually you don't get a lot of insights because, you have some payment data in Stripe, right? Some people churn, never come back, right? You have payment issues. So even though you should generate revenue, you don't, right? Because I don't know, some weird authorization issue in, Brazil. You have different campaigns, right? That cost you different money, right? And so you want to understand, okay, which campaign actually generates how much revenue? Like how efficient are they? So how do you connect suddenly like Google Analytics data with Stripe data and like Mixpanel data? And then I think in certain industries like banking, it gets even harder, right? Because we can't just expose every transaction of a customer and their details to like a third-party tool. What happens if they get hacked? I think for us, it was like, okay, every software that's built and even like any third-party software you use has a database. And the database contains all the valuable information. And that's your source of truth. Because if the database is wrong, the whole application is wrong. And so basically what we started doing is like combining the various data sources in a centralized data warehouse, connecting everything through a user ID, and then had like a very we could then segment the audience the way we wanted. If we wanted to look at only people in Austria at a certain age, we could do this. And we could see how much they cost us, how much money they generate us. What's the unit economics?
What was the single best growth decision you made?
I think the quickest way to get a lot of growth for us was, I think it was a Monday afternoon. Chad, me, and Tom, and I think Alan basically set up a referral campaign, wrote an email, some T's and C's, and enabled free cards to Revolut customers. And that generated like 180,000 signups in a week. And I think back then Revolut grew around 10,000 signups a week.
What was the worst growth decision you made?
For whatever reason, I thought that you can acquire a lot of customers with P2P payments. And so I spent 4 weeks trying to make it work that people can pay someone that's not on Revolut. I just didn't do anything.
I can see that mindset though. Where it's like the WhatsApp idea, which is like invite them to WhatsApp, and then it gets that like linked message which you send to people.
Yeah, I think people thought it's like fraud or something.
Yeah.
You know, they were like, someone wants to send me money on a random platform. Probably doesn't really work.
Yeah, I get that. I want to do a quick fire. So I say a short statement and then you give me your thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
So what's the most common irreversible mistake you see founders make?
They get too hands off. They don't use their product on a daily basis.
Astonishing. What's the most dangerous myth floating around about growth?
I don't think you can. It's really hard to build a product-led business if you start with paid marketing.
I totally agree with you there. Yeah. How does growth change in a world of AI?
I think in the short term, you get spammed even more.
Yeah.
Automated partnerships managers.
Outbound becomes infinite.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking into like automating partnership manager negotiations, and because suddenly you can scale it up to 1 million partnerships managers. I think more spamming. I think at some point probably goes back to first principles, like who really offers value, what's old school traditional ways, kind of like through the noise to reach people.
What would you most like to change about the world of growth?
Getting founders to build better products, or generally building better products. I think it's really hard to sell a product that doesn't really add value to people.
Do you think Revolut was a better product than Monzo?
Yeah.
Why?
I think Monzo is just it's a more modern bank. Like Revolut is a financial ecosystem. I mean, if you think about it, right? Like you have, 50 million B2C customers. Yeah. I don't know how many million businesses. So suddenly you can just stay in the Revolut world. No more Visa, no more MasterCard. It's just something completely new.
What was the biggest lesson from working with Nick?
That you can be very creative, very analytical, and very logical at the same time.
What was the hardest thing about working at Revolut?
To put it, as Nick put it, we're like special forces. We go in, we don't fuck up. So it had that mentality that every meeting, every design catch-up, every marketing campaign, essentially anything you do is perfectly executed at all times at the maximum speed. So if you have a typo in a design review, if a screenshot somewhere is missing, not good. If a FAQ is missing, like everything had to be kind of like Apple, everything had to be perfectly executed at all times.
What have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
It's more like a thought experiment, but I'm wondering if like there's really like the need for the internet the way we know it nowadays in like 15 to 20 years. At the moment, you always have a phone or like a screen that connects you to a virtual world, right? And in that virtual world, it's going completely crazy. You have, crypto, and you have autonomous AI agents and like all kinds of weird things, right? What happens if, let's say, in a few years, probably 4 or 5 years, you will have a lot of robots in the real world. You have, Tesla's robots, and I think Boston Dynamics. These robots basically can speak to you like a human. They can do tasks like a human. Do you really need to go in that virtual world anymore? Or does it become more like a Star Wars where, you interact with the virtual world in a physical world?
That is a change of thought. I wasn't expecting that one at all. Can I ask you, What are the biggest lessons from being an underdog? You know, you advised Kittl today. It's against the £800 gorilla that is Canva, which has an £800 gorilla, which is Adobe.
Yeah.
What are the biggest lessons in that experience?
I mean, if you're a big company, you can't. There's like the bigger you get, the easier you get disrupted, right? Because essentially, like, let's say a market that's worth 10 million is nothing for a company like Canva that makes, I don't know, I think now it is 3 billion, something like that. So, you know, like they don't even go after that market because it's just not big enough, right? So, but it also allows you to basically disrupt from that market and a bigger market and then a slightly bigger market. I mean, in the end of the day, like you have high conviction that there's need for a software like this because you already have proof points. You also have a lot of feedback around, you know, what's not so good with the tools, which allows you to navigate through it. But equally, like it's obviously very hard because you have a huge competitor that is quite strong at what you do. I think like probably the easier way to see it is you want to go in a market where you don't have competition. So if you think about Revolut against Monzo, right, like the markets we grew the fastest wasn't the UK. It was Ireland, it was Romania, it was, you know, Poland. So like while we still competed here and there with, you know, different banks, we went in a lot of markets where we just didn't have competition, which allowed us to raise more money, build better products, hire more people. And I think it's the same, you know, there's always like a way you can see the market or you can segment the market where you basically can build a product where essentially you don't have much competition, where your product is 10x better than the status quo. And I think, you know, the best founders, they find these markets, they find these unique insights to grow through that, right? Rather than where everybody else goes.
Final one for you. When you look across the landscape today, which company growth strategy have you been most impressed by?
The most impressive thing I've seen was Nubank. Like, I mean, they have like a 90% retention rate, like over 24 months. It's ridiculous. It's like they just figured out something in the Brazilian market that just, I don't know, it's magic. It's basically like, from what I understood is in Brazil, because of the financial crisis, they made it illegal to not allow installment payments when you pay for, I don't know, let's say a laptop or food. Because a lot of people are so poor that they wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. So essentially everybody has to offer them, A. B, it was illegal to put interest on it. So obviously everybody chose to pay in installments because why not? There's no downside. What Nubank did was basically saying, okay, we're offering a credit card, so you can pay with Nubank. You go to the merchant, split it into 3 payments, but then in Nubank you can pay it in one go and you get a 5% discount. And then they took the money to basically lend it to others. Their product, I mean, it's so sticky, it's insane. You know, they didn't have competition. I think they have like 100 million active users nowadays. It's just crazy.
I think going back to your point on competition, it's like they were competing against legacy Brazilian banks, which had incredible fees. Like we thought our fee structures were high. I mean, that's insane. Yeah. And so the combination of like product innovation there, which is super cool. I didn't actually know that. Yeah. Combined with the low competition, that's a very good one.
Yeah, I mean, also the finances are impressive. I mean, I think they made nearly $1 billion profit last year or something. It's just, and I mean, they're growing like hell. I mean, Revolut is growing fast, but Nubank is growing even faster.
Val, listen, I've loved doing this. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for letting me just pepper you with questions, and this has been fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.